it was just like, I hope the audio picked that up just perfectly. Goes live, and you just hear of the lighter. That
Yeah,
sounded cool on my end.
I thought about muting it after I did it. I was like, oh crap,
Oh
maybe
no,
I
I'm
should mute
glad
my
you didn't.
microphone.
No, that was great. That was great. And it gave me something to think about here as I waited to see if the stream is coming up, which it does look like it is coming up. Yep, I just got the email notification that there's something live on my channel. So I'm waiting for the day that I get an email notification that I've gone live on YouTube when I don't think that I've gone live on YouTube. That'll be an interesting day. All right, so welcome back, folks, to King Pilled. I have got probably a familiar face here to some of you guys, hopefully to most of you guys. I'll know that I've been doing my job if you guys all know who Tommy is. After this conversation here today, you'll definitely know who Tommy is. We are going to talk about ESG and what that is. Tommy's been what did I put on Twitter? I think I put that you've been a madman just diving into this stuff over the last few years. If I had to list like my experts in the world on ESG based on what I've seen from them, like the research and stuff they've put in, it'd be like you and maybe a couple other people on a couple other points. But you've really impressed me with the deep dive that you've done. So I want to plumb the depths of your mind today, and we're going to get into that. We're also going to get into a little bit of Tommy and I are both fairly recent entrance into a land of orthodoxy. We have just been stumbling upon it over the last few years ourselves, and that's radically changed the way that we look at the world, the way that we interact with it, and the way that we perceive what's going on with us. So that's going to be what we focus on here today, talking about ESG, kind of leading into a little bit about orthodoxy. Before we really dive into it, I just had a couple of housekeeping notes here. I'd like to welcome 2-Bit Podcast as the first member of the YouTube channel. That was one of the first things I was going to bring up, is that you can become a member of the YouTube channel. I don't know exactly how it works. I just know that I set the membership up. And so if you're sitting there you're watching it on the computer, watching it on your phone, there should be something there for you to go sign up. Also, you can join the subscribe star for us, and you can go join the King Pill Discord. And that's probably the place I spend the most time. And I have had most of the most profound conversations that I've ever had in my life have happened on that Discord. They have been lost to time. They're ephemerally captured in a voice chat for the length of time that the voice chat lasts, and then they drift off. They wisp away. And sometimes those are the best conversations. They don't need to be recorded. They don't need to be maintained that way. They just happen, and you are part of them. And then when they're over, they're over. So if you're interested in those kinds of conversations, talking about anything from religion to philosophy to politics to really anything in those veins, then we would love to have you in the King Pill Discord. So you can go to subscribestar.com/kingpill and you can join up there. That is part of what I want to talk about today through the course of this conversation, is how we're supposed to react when we see that demons are moving into our neighborhoods. When, if you just woke up, you imagine, I kind of am picturing like this idyllic spring day with the White House, with the white picket fence in front of the nice American house, and birds are twittering and there's deer running by, and then you just have like these demons that just come and they just set up shop in the neighborhood, and everyone has to just kind of like pretend that they're not there, but try not to cross them. And like, how do you react in that case? If you can't go into open warfare with the demons who move into your neighborhood, then how should we then live? What should be our approach in that case? And I don't think that either Tommy or myself here would consider ourselves experts on this subject. If anything, it's recognizing our own lack of expertise in this and realizing that we need to bone up on those parts of ourselves that has led us on this kind of exploration that we've been doing. So that's part of the ethos of the Discord in there, is that we're people who are recognizing our own insufficiency, where we're at right now, and what we need to do to make ourselves better men primarily. It's mostly, I'm not going to lie, it's mostly men in there. So if that's a group of people you'd like to spend time around, we would absolutely love to have you in there. Anyways, Tommy, welcome aboard, sir. How are you doing tonight? What's going on?
I'm doing well, man. Not much going on. My wife's cooking, and I got home a little earlier today than I normally do, so I went and fed chickens and read a little bit and put up. I had a box of icons. I put those up this afternoon, and so worked up a little sweat and did a few things, trying to get my mower started after 4 months of not having to mow. I think my solenoid went out, so that's always fun. So
that is what I like about Tommy Salmons. I like the down home Americana in you. You're just living the good life. You're like I think I put in the description of the video here that ESG started out as like a weird bailiwick for a bunch of like academic eggheads, and you're about the furthest thing from that archetype.
yeah.
And yet you're the person who I would consider one of the world's like leading most authorities on ESG. So that juxtaposition, I think, is fantastic. What's the term that you've always used with me before in person? You call yourself a coon-ass. Is that what it was?
Yeah. For the most part, like at least culturally, not in blood, but yeah, culturally for sure. I'm Creole, culturally for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Which is basically like a redneck that lives in the swamp. So
I gotta say, the pictures you send of your dogs running around chasing your chickens, or the other way around,
the ducks chasing the dogs,
or the dog, the ducks and the dog. I mean, so you guys got to understand with Tommy, he's got two. Are they purebred?
Yeah, they're both Butters, which is the one with the little pink on his nose, and White. That's Beatrix's dog, and he's 98 pounds. And Boogie is the one that rode with me in the truck, and he's 105 pounds. So yeah, two blue nose pits that are monsters, and yeah.
And they run away from a duck.
Beatrix texted me the other day when I got to work. Every morning before I go to work, I make her a cup of coffee, Fox and Sons. I promised Steve I'd squeeze that in here. And so I made her a cup of coffee, and I brought it to her, and I left, and she went back out to empty the French press, and she said she got her second cup and went to the bed, and she was sitting there getting ready to start work, and she hears this huge commotion. So she comes running out of the bedroom, and the ducks are chasing the dogs through the living room and around through the house. It's like they have no boundaries. They think they own the place. So, and I just got 7 more. So
7 more ducks?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
You get duck eggs?
Well, I did until something got a hold of all of my females. So all I have are 2 males. The 2 that chase my dogs are both males. And they just kind of hang out together, and they survived. I think my females were sitting on the eggs. They might have had some fertilized eggs. They were sitting on the eggs, I'm pretty sure. And something got them at night because they refused to stay in a coop. I never could get the ducks to go back in their coop, and running around trying to swim through a pond that's, shoulder deep, trying to catch ducks is not a lot of fun. So I just stopped messing with them. I just stopped even trying. And these 2, they act like they're trained dogs, man. I pull up in the afternoon, I get home from work, and they come meet me at the truck wanting me to throw treats to them. So,
man, you're living the good life.
Yeah, I'm enjoying myself.
What is it? So how does someone like you living in the swamps, hanging out with your ducks and your dogs and your wife and driving a truck, how did you get into ESG? What got it onto your radar?
Well, the first thing I read was a Time magazine article called The Great Reset at the end of 2019, and it was written by Klaus Schwab, and he mentioned it in there, and he kind of like brushed over it, and he was kind of interchanging ESG and stakeholder capitalism. And I was just kind of like, all right, I don't understand what this guy's talking about. I was really trying to just look into the Great Reset and try to figure out what that is. Cause, if you remember in 2019, people started mentioning that and bringing that up. And so, I was curious, and I looked into it a little bit, and I was like, well, I don't really understand what it is. And so, it's corporate jargon. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I saw that Klaus Schwab had written a book on stakeholder capitalism in like 1971 or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, I got his Great Reset book and I read that, and it was a terrible read. I don't know if I want to read any more of what he writes. And then I ordered The Fourth Industrial Revolution, or Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I started reading on that. And while I was reading that, I also went ahead and got it in audio form. So when I was driving, I would listen to it, and I would be able to listen to a chapter like a few times so I could catch things. And then I'd go back at the end of the day and I'd read over that chapter so that I could kind of figure out, like, what is this guy trying to talk? What's he trying to say? Right. Again, it's that style of writing, the way they write it's so terrible. And I started picking up on some of the stuff, and then I remembered some of the notes I had taken on ESG, trying to figure out what that was, what stakeholder capitalism really like entailed. And I started noticing patterns. I started noticing trends. And then Glenn Beck was promoting his book that he was writing at the time about the Great Reset, and he started talking about ESG. So I was like, well, let me see what he has to say about it. And he kind of opened my eyes to how far along ESG was, that there were already 401k companies like Citibank that were already putting ESG metrics on dashboards of their 401k holders. And I was like, that's crazy. I just heard about this last year. Like, it's only been a couple of months. I mean, if you remember, I did that podcast with Pete. I think it was in March. It was either late March of 2020 or early April. So already from November, when I ran into ESG, reading that Time article, to March, somehow in that period of time, you had these financial institutions that were implementing the ESG metrics on people's 401ks. And that really struck me. That caught my attention because my parents have 401ks. Now it's something that I can see how it affects me. And that made me really curious.
So what are these? Like, what for someone do like the like explain like I'm five kind of for someone who has just kind of heard this term, knows it's vaguely associated with libs, maybe knows it's like the next new social justice frontier sort of, but what makes it stand out? What's unique about it compared to those other things?
So it stands for environmental, social justice, and corporate governance. It's like a social credit score, similar to what China uses. But they utilize I guess I don't know any other way of saying it, but like the kind of the social Marxist kind of metrics, right? So if you think about like what's popular in culture right now, cultural Marxist, I guess I should have said, if you think about what's popular in culture right now, right? Like it's okay. It's like, you're supposed to be transgender. You're supposed to be gay. You're supposed to have had abortions. You're supposed to believe in climate change, and all the, these cultural kind of red lines that are in the sand, that if you're not within this, as Tom Woods might call it, a 3x5 card of allowable opinion, then you're a Nazi. Right. And so, and I started noticing it with the 401ks first, with the dashboards. But what really caught my attention was when everybody was talking about the vaccine passports. And so I started looking into the social justice, and I found a graph that showed you what metric, like what bullet point fit under what metric. And I recognized that under corporate governance was health and safety. And then it got into talking about more details, like are these people jabbed, like blah 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 blah. And I'm like, how much exercise are they doing, this, that, and the other? And I'm like, this is like something straight out of a dystopian novel. They're going to penalize you for your personal beliefs, your personal convictions, if you're not like living the life that they want you to live. And the way they're doing it is through the financial institutions. And so then I had to figure out, like, what are you supposed to, how are they going to utilize the financial institutions to penalize people? Well, then you started hearing that Stripe was canceling like Alex Jones and wouldn't pay out payments to Alex Jones, stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I see what they're doing. So what they did is they took this ESG metric, the environmental, the social justice, the corporate governance. They said, if your business does not fit into these metrics and does not operate as culturally approved by these metrics, then we are going to cut off funding. We're going to cut off loans. We're not going to, your credit's not going to be approved, whatever. You're not going to be able to buy a house. You're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do that. Well, in order to pass that, the corporations were just the carrot to get the people to move, right? Because if you look at the World Economic Forum, I read an article the other day actually that laid it out perfectly. The goal of the World Economic Forum is not only to control all people, it's to control all resources. And so in order to do that, they have to get the people to move the way they want people to move, which means that you own nothing and you will be happy. And they have to convince you and they have to move you in that direction. How do they move you in that direction? Through financial institutions and corporations. When Coca-Cola goes woke, it's not because Coca-Cola only wants to sell to LGBTQ, whatever acronym is now, or trannies or whatever. That's not what's important to them. The reason Coca-Cola goes woke is to move the populace. They want to move you. When you see Hershey's going Hershey bar, it's not to get you to convince you that it's okay. It's in order to move you and silence you and to separate the wheat from the chaff. And as they can separate the wheat from the chaff, those that are the chaff then end up losing their banking and their ability to work, whatnot. In any kind of financial incentive that you may afford today and may look at today as the way you do business is going to be taken away from you. And they're going to find ways of taking it away from you by setting these dividing lines in the sand through these cultural issues.
It's basically using the free market to take control of the free market. That was what this really I did an episode 2 years ago now, I think, we talked about BlackRock and the Fed using BlackRock to buy up neighborhoods.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I, like, at the time I said, this is the privatization of America. This is like private capital taking executive control over massive swaths of America. Now that's in the realm of real estate, but you can extend this, like you said, out to your very person. Your identity now becomes associated with a digital record. So essentially your identity has been turned into property. So you're by creating these institutions like they have and then being able to network through the entire society using the financial system and essentially take the society by the balls, they're essentially turning all of the people within that society into property.
Right.
So they're doing this according to, this whole thing is opt-in. It's the people who are cooperating with it voluntarily. They're choosing, we want to have this score. We want to have all these things. Now you could say that they're being leveraged into it.
Well,
the people
they
who
are
making those
leveraged.
Decisions are ideologically aligned with the people who are doing the leveraging. They're creating the plausible deniability for each other.
Well, what happened was in 2020, the SEC developed a task force for ESG. And so the SEC is monitoring the financial institutions and who the financial institutions do business with. If they're doing business with companies that are outside of these metrics and don't fit into the social credit score, then that financial institution gets penalized. So the financial institution is now incentivized to discriminate against people that don't align with this perspective, right? by the financial institutions being incentivized, then the corporations are now incentivized to remain within these metrics. Well, in order for the corporations to remain in these metrics, they have to move the way they do business and their products and services into these metrics, right? So when you look at like the top 5 arms manufacturers of the United States, all CEOs are women. That's not by accident. That was planned. That was done. And not based upon their merit, but based upon these metrics. And what people don't realize, these metrics have been around. I had taken notes on the history of this. So in 2004, the UN employed financial institutions to write up a blueprint of sustainable development. And the white paper is called Who Cares Wins? Connecting Financial Markets to a Changing World. Then in 2009, the COP15 meeting in Denmark saw all developed nations commit to paying out over $100 billion to develop third world countries under the Sustainable Development banner. Now, if you read Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, one of the things that Klaus Schwab talks about in there is that third world countries, people that don't want anything to do with technology and AI and transhumanism, are going to have no choice. They're going to be left with no choice because it's going to swallow up all markets in all fields. So if you want to engage in society, you're going to have no choice but to cooperate in these systems. Then in 2015, you had COP21, which was the Paris Climate Agreement. So this expanded the agenda from governments into financial institutions and corporations. This was all done behind the scenes. They were laying out all this stuff out publicly about how these governments had signed these treaties in order to fulfill these financial obligations over so much time to cut greenhouse emissions, this, that, and the other. But behind the scenes, you had financial institutions meeting and signing on to these deals. When Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, when he was elected and he pulled out of Paris Climate Accord, what happened was these financial institutions either were to follow Trump or they were to hold on to the deal that they had signed it onto in 2015. They chose to hold on to the deal, but the only way they could have held on to that deal was to accelerate their momentum and their involvement within the deal, which exposed them, right? And this caused people like Klaus Schwab to get over their skis. And it's the only reason that all this stuff was exposed to all of us. Vivek Ramaswamy had a really good way of describing this, though, because you were saying it's like the free market capturing the free market. It's even better than that. It's a bigger scam than that. What they're doing is they're taking your tax dollars, they're putting it into this fund, pouring it into corporations to push corporations and other countries into a more cultural Marxist type framework, the ESG model, and then charging you an arm and a leg to continue to live your lifestyle. So not only are they utilizing your tax dollars, they're utilizing they're utilizing the additional profits that they're getting from you in order to push this metric. And the next move in this metric is introducing CBDCs, because as the president of the International Monetary Fund said so openly, CBDCs are a way that governments can control the spending of the population. So we all thought it was ridiculous when New York City wanted to make soda illegal. Well, now they can put a limit on how much soda you can buy, because the way they monitor it is through your ESG metrics. All they have to do is say, oh, well, that goes under health and safety.
So then your every single transaction, every single thing
is
that you
being
do to
monitored.
participate in the market is being monitored and categorized
Yeah.
and filtered, and your identity that has already been sold is being changed for you.
Hmm.
So there, you've sold your identity now to your ability to participate in the market has been turned into a commodity that's owned, and that commodity is being um, uh, changed. It's being molded. So they're taking your person, and then they're molding it into the person that they, whoever the they are, whatever they want you to be. You're being molded into that and turned into that.
And it's moving us into a world government structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And people have a hard time wrapping their minds around this, but I think I found an easy way to describe it because they're already doing this. So let's say your financial institution is Wells Fargo, right? Wells Fargo not only does business in the US, it does business overseas, right? So let's say Hungary has a more strenuous ESG metric on their financial institutions than the US does on their financial institutions. If Wells Fargo wants to continue to do business in Hungary, they have to adhere to the Hungarian metrics of ESG. So that affects us
Mm.
here. So if you want to keep banking with Wells Fargo, you then have to adhere to Hungary's laws.
You can see kind of an example of this with you know how a few years ago, all of a sudden, every time you go open a web page, you have to accept all the cookies and settings on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's from a piece of legislation that went through the EU, that the EU is requires companies to display. It has no bearing on us legally in the US,
Right.
but everyone in the US gets that on every single um on every single web page we land on, because that's now the default thanks to the EU. So it would be the same thing would apply to like your ability to shop on Amazon.
Mm, yes. Now
Mm.
there are people that are fighting back, and there are things that people can do to fight back. And one of those things I always say, the first thing I did whenever I started reading up on this stuff, I pulled all my money out of whatever bank we were with. It was one of the big banks. I think it was Citi, but I'm not sure. I don't remember. Oh, Capital One. That's what it was. See, and I put it in the local credit union, and so all my banking I do through the local credit union. You and you can actually go talk to the people if you have a local credit union, small local bank close to you. Go talk to them. Ask them about what they think about ESG metrics. They even know what it is. A lot of these banks are trying to fight back because what it's going to do, it's going to bankrupt them and put them in a situation to where they're insolvent, and these big banks are just going to swallow them up.
Yep.
Right. And um, some people are celebrating the news about Vanguard. Vanguard announced last November they were rethinking their adherence to ESG metrics. They said woke capitalism, but it's basically the same thing. Vivek Ramaswamy wrote a book called Woke Inc. If you want to read up on kind of how it all meshes together. But here just a few days ago, I think it was the 5th. I think it was March 5th. They announced they have actually like done it. They have actually backed away from these woke metrics and this in the sustainable development model. I don't know if I buy it. I would personally, they're so in line with BlackRock. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of expect them to just rebrand it and try
Mm-hmm.
to think of another way to do it. You saw this kind of with Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola stepped back from the woke stuff, fired their head advertiser, hired a new attorney to take over the advertising, and they're creeping this stuff back in slower. They're like a lot of these companies have found that just kind of jumping in the deep end isn't helping them much. It's causing a lot of attention, and what they need to do is not draw so much attention to them. They have to ease you into it, and it's kind of the ratchet effect that Higgs talks about, right? Where it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but you never get back to where you started from,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that's what they're going to keep doing. They're going to keep pulling you and pulling you and pulling you. Eventually, you're either going to set your feet firm in the sand, or you might as well just walk along with them.
Mm. That kind of squares with a an analogy that I've thought about with this everyone kind of has this expectation. I use the Skynet imagery here, that the incoming technocracy, global corporation, whatever it is, that it's going to be a jackbooted thug-led organization. But I don't think that that's the case, because I think that the spirit of the modern regime is that of the overbearing mother. It's a feminine spirit that is it's built on the principles of liberty. So it's built on the principles of liberalism, and essentially everyone is free to do as they please, completely hands off, anti-violent, opposed to warfare, all that sort of thing. Those are all very feminine principles. And when it's unconstrained, then it turns into, I think, a beast like this that is totalitarian in its overbearing femininity. So it's inducing you, it's seducing you and drawing you in, and promising you that it's going to protect you and it's going to take care of you, but it's really going to smother you to death.
Right.
And so that squares with that imagery of it being a feminine regime. It's a feminine beast, which I think it's not a coincidence that this, if you get into biblical prophecy, Revelation, like
the Whore of Babylon.
The Whore of Babylon, exactly. It's that same imagery.
Yeah.
So I think that what you're seeing with a lot of this stuff is it is opt-in. You don't have to participate in the entrapment schemes. There are ways of working around it, but I think in order to work around it, first you have to understand what it is you're trying to work around. So how would you answer that?
Well, let's kind of cover what's happening here. John Robb does some good work on this. I don't know if you've ever read his blog, Global Gorillas. He does some good work on this stuff, and I've had him on the show. He was very interesting to talk to, but he talks about this hive mind mentality. I can't remember exactly what he calls it. He doesn't call it the hive. He calls it something else. But anyway, that's beside the point. So what they do is they throw out, like, let's just take, for instance, transgenderism, drag queen story hour. Let's just take that for instance, right? Then you have these kind of thought leaders, right, that attack, and then all their little minions see them attack. So if you say something bad about drag queen story hour, you could be, I don't know, like me, I'm not real super active on Twitter, even since I came back not that long ago. I only have 1,200 followers. I think I'm down like 1,500 followers since when I was on there before. But I don't really engage on Twitter too much. I really don't like arguing on Twitter that much. It's really not much for me there. So, but if I were to say something negative about Drag Queen Story Hour, I'd probably get thousands and thousands of interactions and engagements. And why is this? Because this hive mind clusters and it latches on, and it's fighting that. It's like almost like white blood cells fighting a disease, right? And these are the people they label Nazis and white supremacists, whatever. And it has nothing to do with your skin color. I promise you. I've seen it too many times. I'm like, what? So that's they're utilizing this ostracizing and this kind of peer pressure propagandistic mentality against people. And so they're getting you to opt into things if you were to step back and rationally think about, you wouldn't typically opt into. That's how they're moving the society. So you're absolutely correct about that. And they do it through a very maternal kind of aspect, to where it's like, well, I'm only arguing with you because I care about these people. Don't you care about grandma? Don't you care about, the mentally ill? Don't you care about the homeless? It's all in the guise of compassion, right? But it's all meant to control you. If any of you have been in especially men or women too, if you've been in an abusive relationship, the person that is abusing you is always in the process of manipulating you, always constantly manipulating you, constantly telling you it's for your own good, constantly trying to convince you that you're always wrong, gaslighting the hell out of you. And that's what we see in modern society, right? And that's very feminine energy. Like whether it's a man or a woman doing that to somebody, that's extremely feminine energy. That shows a real high degree of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And that high degree of insecurity depends on that hive backing them up for the strength to keep moving forward.
That's a really interesting point. I hadn't taken it that far yet. That it's a, if you have a woman trying to play the role of a man, then you're going to get an insecure woman that is going to feel like she's working in a role that she's not designed for, which I'd argue she's not.
Right.
But that it's interesting because that reminded me of a thought that Curtis Yarvin, it was Mencius Moldbug, I think, who said it, and I prefer to think about Mencius Moldbug more than Curtis Yarvin. He said that, I think, like something along the lines of the most dangerous state is a threatened state. So the times that you have, like throughout history, the times that you have like a totalitarian dictator who goes on a murderous rampage, that archetype, which is how we're kind of conditioned to think of any sort of single solitary leader, those are always men, kings, emperors who are insecure in their power. The ones who were secure in their power, who didn't feel threatened, were great rulers. They were the ones who have an incentive to take care of their kingdom, provide for their people, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that's an interesting connection to make there then, that this is it's a feminine spirit that is insecure. And so what does an insecure thing do when it gets attacked? It lashes out. So if you're going to get like any kind of violent response or any sort of attack, it's going to be in that form. It's going to be emotional lashing out. So those are kind of like, those are the vectors that you're then having to position yourself to avoid. You have to kind of pick out, okay, if I do this, then how is she going to respond? And if I position myself in this way, is she going to notice me, or is she going to be too busy looking at other stuff? Those kinds of things. I think for me at least, that's an interesting way to start framing the conversation, to figure out, all right, so if this is the case, if this is what's happening to us, well, clearly, like, trying to start a political movement to go be anti-ESG is just going to get adapted and subverted to advance the cause.
Right.
So what do you do once you start? What have you been doing once you've started realizing this stuff?
Well, yeah, and I was getting to that. I just kind of wanted to like add on to some of the stuff you were saying leading into this. Like I said, number one, I went and I found the local credit union near me. Number two, I'm building relationships outside of the internet. It's like real relationships are pretty important. I have a really good church I go to, and in Orthodoxy, it seems that there's this really common thread with the way people like us think, and especially about life and politics around us. It might not be identical, but there is that. There's also a history of the church being oppressed and repressed, and having to band together, kind of live under the radar and take care of each other and care for each other as a family. So that's very comforting that history is there within that church. I listen a lot to the people around me. Because I'm not over the road anymore. I work in a store now. I still do drive, but I'm in a store and around people a lot more. I tend to listen, and I'm not in an area that is prone to adapting these metrics and the social credit score. That's a huge thing. I always say, get away from those people. If you're in an area, listen closely to the people around you. If you're in an area that is prone to adopt this stuff, then you are either going to end up being the enemy of the state within that region, or you need to get out, or you're just going to go along to get along, like a lot of people do. But so, I mean, you don't have a whole lot of choice if you live in an area like, let's say, Seattle or Portland or something like that. I mean, you're gonna do what you got to do to survive, and whether that's leave, get away, which is what I say, is just get away, because all these cities are going to be transformed into 15-minute cities anyway, and it's all going to be it's going to be like a panopticon in real life. Not like the digital panopticon that we've always talked about, but this is going to be, they're going to merge the virtual reality, the digital reality, and actual reality all into one. Saudi Arabia is already putting together a plan for it. I heard Ohio's looking at doing some stuff very similar to that. So they're going to lock you into this surveillance state, and you're not going to leave. You're going to be there. You're just going to be cattle in a pen. And so I always tell people, if you're in city proper, get out. Like, even if you just go to the suburbs, just stay arm's length away from that city so that you have somewhere to go. Because it's, and what I've done here is, this was the property my parents owned. They put it up for sale because my mom was working in Houston, driving from Orange to Houston every day, which was a 2.5-hour drive. She eventually got an apartment there in Houston and was only coming home on the weekends. They were tired of not seeing each other. So they put the house up for sale, bought a house in Magnolia so that they could actually live together like a married couple. And when they put it up for sale, this was the property they wanted to retire on. I said, I'm going to buy it. And so I bought it from them. And so what I have going on here is I'm developing an arc and a place that I have 5 kids. So they all live in the Houston area. My parents live north of Houston. If something happens, there's a place for them to escape to if need be. And so that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm as self-sufficient as possible. I have my chickens, eggs, constantly, ducks, plan on getting some goats. I grow some vegetables. I have a greenhouse. I'm going to be building a second greenhouse this year, so it's just constantly trying to think of what can I do to ensure that I'm in a better position than I was yesterday. And so that's it. Just every day, how can I be a little bit more self-sufficient today than I was yesterday? And that's all I can do, is just try to make some progress along the way to kind of add some sort of insulation around myself. So when these things do really kick into high gear and there's nowhere for people to turn, I'm not stuck.
Yes. That's when we first started talking about the whole king pilled idea, that was you're like an archetype of what we were thinking about. Taking ownership over your sphere, or what did you call it? Your arc. You're taking control of your arc and creating boundaries, establishing, all right, you guys are encroaching too far. Here's my lines that I'm drawing. Here's the foundations for my defenses that I'm putting up. Because one thing that I think about this is that I don't want to get too reckless with this line of thought, but I think that there's a limit to the ability for a certain organization of people to be able to project power across time and space. And what they're using all this technology for is as like force multipliers for their ability to project power. Now, these are going to be some of the best force multipliers for projecting power that the world has ever seen. They already are.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that they also have a tendency, as you mentioned earlier, they get out over their skis. And as things are accelerating quicker and quicker, the differences that happen to exist within the different elite factions are going to get magnified more and more. So even if the current elite factions are kind of sort of all operating in unison, as things accelerate, I think the differences are going to get magnified, and you're going to start seeing factionalism. This is kind of the way of the world. This is the way that empires always fall. And so this empire is going to fall at some point. Now, is that going to happen in 50 years? Is that going to happen in 550 years? I don't know. But I may not live to see it, but my kids may, or my kids' kids may. So if I'm going to accept that, all right, well, a comet isn't going to hit the planet in the next year, so I'm going to be here a little while, then it's time to start what is the phrase? Planting seeds that will grow into trees that you'll never sit under. It's having the long range planning and making a, like you said, an arc. I think that's a fantastic analogy. You build out the arc that you can ride out the crazy storm that's coming.
Yeah.
That sounds like a Q podcast.
Yeah. I have a granddaughter. So my kids are grown, right? My youngest son, he'll be 18 this year, right? But I have a granddaughter, and so I have to continue to think about these things. And she's 3 years old. Like, what's the world going to look like? And last time I talked to Courtney Turner, I was on her podcast a few weeks ago talking about ESG, and she asked me, she goes, "Are they going to succeed?" And I was like, "Well, to what ends? Like, what do you mean succeed? What does success look like?" And she's like, "Are they going to ultimately meet their ends? Are they going to reach their goal?" And I said, "No. I mean, just like every totalitarian regime, whether it be, fascism or communism or whatever it would be, it's like an Ouroboros that eventually eats its own tail. The question is how many people get hurt in the process."
Yes. This is a great question here from Serpico. This is the precise thought I've been thinking about lately. So he said, if all the good and sane people are moving away from tech and society, then won't the bad people gain a tech and power advantage over us? And I've gone back and forth on this one, and I'm kind of in typical Orthodox fashion. I'm sort of landing on both, but I think that it is true that they will gain a tech or power advantage over us. I think they already have a tech and power advantage over us. So it's just really kind of a matter of how much more of an advantage is that going to be. And I do think that there is a place for people not leaving the city, so to speak, the people who remain and stick it out till the bitter end, because this regime is going to fall. It's going to collapse. It's going to turn into a new regime someday. And that regime may be better. That regime may be worse. Either way, people are going to live through it. There's regimes that have risen and fallen, and we continue going on today. So I kind of land on, for some people, it's good to stay and dig yourself in. When I talked to Father Josiah Trenum, I put almost this exact question to him. And he said Orthodox people don't run. We stand our ground and we fight for our communities, and we're active in local governments and advocating for our neighbors, protecting them, etc., to the best of our abilities. Some people, that's not going to be a realistic thing. You're going to know your own situation. You're going to go, if it's best for you to go escape somewhere else. That's kind of what we did. We left Southern California because we didn't have a really pronounced support network there. We had some family, but if the shit hit the fan, we didn't have a really clear exit strategy. So we moved to Texas, where we're surrounded. We're within a few hours, at least, of people like yourself, like Buck, some other friends that we have personally. There's a bunch of different people down here who we saw as a good support network. So I think it's community is really what it comes down to. That was kind of a long answer. What are your thoughts on that, Tommy?
Well, I concern myself with a couple of things. If you're participating in their system of tech power dynamic, you're ultimately feeding it, because that's how they get power, is by feeding off of your information, right? And they utilize this information to control you. If you're able to be resistant to it and you want to stay in the cities, my only thing is, like, have a bug out plan. Set yourself up something, just something, whether that's buying a tent and knowing where a nice patch of woods is. I don't know, but find yourself a clean water source and go to town. Like, all right, fine. But in my defense, I wandered out of Houston for 20 years. So it took me a long time to get out of that place, and I never want to go back. I despise having to go there. And yeah, I'm not gonna like I'm not gonna insult you if you decide to stay. I'm just telling you what I see. It's just, again, each day, just, are you more self-sustained than you were the day before? It doesn't mean you have to grow 100% of your own food. It doesn't mean you have to catch 100% of your own food or kill 100%. Just, are you in a better position today than you were yesterday, as far as your sustainability? Because let's say none of this stuff happens. What is happening? The supply chains are going berserk. We don't know when this is going to collapse. My wife has family in South Africa going weeks without electricity, and they're already experimenting with brownouts and stuff in California, right? And this is how it started in South Africa. So just at least give yourself some insurance, right? A little bit of cushion. Make sure you're going to be okay. Because ultimately what I'm talking about, the reason I talk about this stuff is not for my own glory. It's because I think it matters to everybody. I think it's something that us normal people that live day in and day out, paycheck to paycheck, paying our bills, going through the hustle and bustle of life, need to understand and recognize that the elites do not view us as people on the same level as them. They view us as a secondary species that is here for their benefit. We are human resources as far as they're concerned.
Isn't that a prescient phrase that just showed up? And HR departments have been such a, if you're talking about like a feminine influence, HR departments are running companies now. That's what this whole thing, I remember it's happened so quickly because it was, I don't know, 2015, 2016 when Jordan Peterson was coming up, and it was all the college protests of him and Milo and all that. And so much of this stuff that's become just completely commonplace today about race and gender and all this stuff was all like niche stuff for weirdos on college campuses. I was in college between 2007 and 2011 or so. And looking back now, I can see the seeds of it. And I was in a relatively conservative Christian college too. And I could see the seeds of it back then, but I didn't realize it until later on looking back. But if you think 2007, 2008, that's like 15 years ago. And how much has this stuff, if you're talking about it, you were talking about like making sure you're a little bit better each day. So you're optimizing your trajectory. You're not focused on your position. You're focused on your trajectory.
Right.
This trajectory that they've taken over the past 15 years is exponential.
Yeah.
So it feels to me like it either has to go completely, what's the big math word? Asymptotic? Is that the word I'm thinking of here?
I don't know. You're over my head.
Yeah. It's where you have like, I think it's where you have like a line like this, and then you have a line that's coming up like this, and it's getting closer and closer, but never touching it. And it goes up infinitely like that. That's the kind of trajectory that it feels like we're on. And that may have been the wrong word. Some math guy's gonna probably freaking out right now.
Yeah. You're gonna get hate mail.
Yeah. It feels like it either has to just explode through the sky, or something's going to happen and it's going to flatten out in some way. And what I'm curious about is where that flatten out point will be. Because from here, I can see any range of outcomes between like the earth literally self-destructing and everything on it, and the whole thing kind of burns itself out in a frenzy over the next couple of decades. And, our children live in, something approximating like the 60s or something, the 50s or 60s. Both of those seem conceivable to me. Which end of that would you put yourself on?
I think it's going to be like the way I look at it. I'm sure you've read Brave New World, right? You remember
I've read part of it. Yeah.
Well, there's a scene where they go and they visit the natives. They go visit the kind of the old people, and it's like they called them the savages. That's what it was. They go visit these savages that live like in nature, and it sounds a lot like they're visiting like Native American, like a Native American tribe. But that's kind of how I see it. I think you're going to have like we're going to be spectacles. Those of us that live out in the country, it's like they're going to come out like be tourists out in the country looking at us like we're zoo animals because they're this like transhumanist like species that is like integrated with computers, and we're actually natural human beings eating beef, and we're going to just discuss them because we sweat and work and get dirty and all that stuff. I really think it's going to be something like that. I think it's just going to like be this really odd kind of relationship that's going to separate those that are more in tune with nature and those that want to be part of the technocrats and part of the technocratic state.
You know what? Your analogy just ticked off in my head. That analogy of the zoo is absolutely perfect, except I think in this case, the cages are going to be holding them in,
Yep.
not holding us in.
Yeah.
That's the structure of this system that's being built up, where the people who are in the cages are the ones who think that the cage is protecting them.
Yeah, that's something Courtney talks about these 15-minute cities that they're experimenting and they're talking about, and I don't know how serious this is because I haven't read all the stuff she's read on this. I'll be doing a podcast with her coming up in the next couple of weeks on this exact subject. So I'm kind of speaking out of turn, but I know she's brought it up to me a couple of times. Is they're talking about wireless fencing. So one of these objects that is injected in you or that you're combining yourself with is going to be remotely tied to this wireless fence and keep you in the confinement or the corral.
That is eerie. That was a conversation that Buck just had recently. Did you hear that one?
I don't know. I don't think so. I heard that one.
Buck had a really interesting conversation with a guy talking about this. He's an Indian guy who was like a Silicon Valley like venture capitalist, and he he was describing how AI and this wireless fencing and all of these things were going to work to essentially create where I differed with him is that he seemed like he was very much on the Skynet side of things, that this is like a fist coming down to crush you, when in reality it's like a hand being slowly closed on you. But he was talking about that concept of the fencing and using it to you can like geofence specific areas. You can, I mean, with the smart cars, they can turn your car off if it goes past a certain point. They could turn your card off if it goes past a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
They could. What's interesting though is that there's Jabby. I think that was his name, Jabby. I think he's at No Flaps on Twitter. I remember his name there.
Okay.
What's interesting to me is that I also see this is. I feel like a heretic saying something like this. I can feel me of a few years ago yelling at myself saying something like this. I can see uses for technologies like that would be very beneficial, like keeping sexual predators away from schools, or preventing people with a DUI from purchasing alcohol, or like those kinds of things.
Right.
And there's a conversation here about technology that's technology doesn't have a will. So technology itself is not evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's those who use the technology. And I see this pattern that keeps repeating itself, where if you go back 20 years ago and you showed someone 20 years ago what today looks like, they'd be like, oh my God, that looks like an apocalyptic hellhole.
Mm-hmm.
But if you showed someone the early 2000s when the person lived in the early 80s, they'd be like, And if you start getting longer time frames than that, there's our perspective changes so much as time goes by that what seemed completely oppressive yesterday is now just kind of like, it's just normal. This is what normal life is. So when my mind gets really apocalyptic about some of these scenarios, I have this other voice in my head saying, it's not going to be that sexy. It's not going to be that, you're not going to feel like you're in an apocalyptic movie.
Yeah,
it's just going to be normal life.
Yeah, because it's going to be so gradual.
Right.
Yeah.
But
it's like the demons whispering to you, right? The passions come subtly.
So then how would this, if that's something that's going to happen gradually, or that's something that does happen gradually, and yet everything is exponentially accelerating, are those two forces going to come head to head, where you can no longer be subtle and gradual and a temptress about it? You have to like go into straight up open seduction mode.
Yeah, but obviously, I mean, but it's like calling pedophiles maps.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? Like, we all know what they're talking about. We all know what it is. But now it's just, okay, it's just part of it now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, I think about, like, I told a joke in our group chat one day about these kids nowadays didn't know what it means to suffer. You know, they have Pornhub on every device. We were masturbating to National Geographic and sneaking and sharing Playboy pages with friends, you know? Like, it's just these things. Yeah, it starts off gradual and subtle, and it accelerates to such a degree that it's normalized. And so but the acceleration is gradual and subtle too, right? So by the time it hits, you know, critical mass, well, you were only 2 miles per hour slower than that anyway. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, all right, whatever. Yeah, sure. You know, again, it's that ratchet effect. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and they just keep moving you, and you don't realize you're being moved. But you're reacting when you're saying, oh, well, it's moving, so it's accelerating so quickly. What you're reacting to is you're able to step back and look at 10, 15 years ago when you were in college. But what most people are looking at is yesterday or last week. And so they're like, what are you talking about accelerating so quickly? Like, we've been moving in this direction. Like, this has just been happening. So to those of us who are constantly aware and paying attention, and it went from Alex Jones screaming about drag queen story hour to drag queen story hour in a town near you, and it seemed like a blink of an eye, but it was probably 2 or 3 years. Because I remember when he first started talking about it, I was like, what is he talking about? I've never heard of this, you know? And I would look it up. I couldn't find anything about it. I couldn't find people talking about it. I couldn't find anything about it. And suddenly it's everywhere. And now it's mainstream news. And you're like, And so for us, that was a quick acceleration. But for the people that haven't been paying attention, they're just like, what's the big deal? Like, there have been drag events my entire life. They don't recognize that, yes, there have been drag events ever since, the 50s, probably before that. But now there's 100 drag events in Houston, Texas tomorrow. Whereas before it was like one a year, and how did they do that? Manipulation, propaganda, what's her name? RuPaul Drag Race, right? They normalize these things. And they normalize these things in such a gradual form that it doesn't feel like a big deal to the person who's just going through life, which happens to be the majority of people. So this is why the majority of people opt in. And there has to be a huge line crossed before they begin to opt out. And they have to have their eyes opened and see the light before they opt out. You had said something a while ago Whereas with the wireless fencing and stuff like that you could see like a positive purpose for it. Well, this last Saturday we had a Lent retreat at my church, and Father Joseph Honeycutt from St. Joseph's in Houston was speaking. He was doing a class, and he said something that just blew my mind. He said, "Do you think the passions came before or after the fall?" And I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, probably before. And he said, the passions were powers before the fall.
Whoa. The passions were powers before the fall. That is going to clang around my noggin for a while.
And then after that, he went around the group, the class that was there, and he started asking us. He's like, how could greed be good? How could pride be good? How could avarice be used for good? How could you utilize this for God's will? And I mean, he had answers to all of it. And I was like, oh, wow. I mean, it blew my mind. It was just one of those, as soon as he said it, I was like, I wrote it down and I'm like, oh, wow.
So I have two questions in my mind. So I'm going to ask the first one first because it's kind of tied on to what we've been talking about, and then the next one will go more in the orthodoxy direction. Do you think that there's an extent to which we play a role in this accelerating process by pointing to these things and talking about them and generating conversation around them? What I mean is, for example, you have Alex Jones talking about Drag Queen Story Hour, and then Alex Jones people start talking about Drag Queen Story Hour. And so then people who support Drag Queen Story Hour now feel, from their perspective, they're like, oh, well, now I have to talk about this in public to support this thing to defend this thing that I support. And then you get this ping-ponging back and forth to where the thing gets elevated out. I mean, I think this sort of dynamic is done intentionally. I know this dynamic exists where you deliberately insert a conversation or insert something into the conversation and then deliberately insert the response to it. And you kind of just create the two groups and set them on each other and then wait until they spin out into something else. Do you think that we play a role in that when we do shows like this, talking about it? And even if we do, is that a bad thing or is it just inevitable?
I think it's like when you're taking jujitsu and you get put in a choke and you want to break free of that choke, they tell you to turn into the choke. So you're gonna initially feel that pain before you get to the relief, right? And so there are 19 states that have filed lawsuits against BlackRock. There are 20 attorney generals looking to pass legislation that would stop banking institutions discriminating against their patrons because of their spending habits and their political views. If people weren't talking about it, that would have never happened. Mm-hmm. They would have just, like I said, this started in the 70s. They would have just kept slowly but surely, like pushing it through. And so, yeah, I think there's an initial pain, like you said with me, like an old man screaming at the clouds, like, whoa. And there were times, man, where it felt hopeless. It felt like, I mean, even Pete told me the last time I talked to him, he was like, yeah, even back when you sounded crazy, I could see what you were talking about. But like, there's this admission that I did sound crazy because I'm talking about something nobody is talking about, that's on no one's radar. And I'm screaming at you going, look at this. And I'm telling people in the liberty space about this stuff. And they're like, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. Right. And I'm like, I don't care what I sound like, dude. I have the receipts, right. I have white papers. I have the SEC's, press release. What do you want? And it's like, people didn't want to hear it. And it was like, it's hard being the first one, right? It's hard being the first one to say something, but I just couldn't stop saying something because I saw what I saw whenever I looked at this. I saw this hurting my parents, right? I saw it hurting my children and my grandkids. Like, I didn't see bad legislation. I saw an actual turn of the dime and something that was going to affect generations and cause pain on people. And I did not want those close to me to feel that pain.
This is where I think it's really good that this conversation is headed, because I spent a lot of time wrestling with that kind of precise dilemma, or at least the same flavor dilemma, where I'm sitting here thinking I've had this whole last several years of being very invested in the political arena and wanting to see certain political causes supported, wanting to see them come about and everything. And then suddenly something kind of yanked me away from that, and I got completely focused away from it. And now sometimes when I start reading about politics or looking at politics or something, like it almost makes me sick. I'm just like, oh, I just feel like I'm getting dirty by associating with this. Yet I'm confronted by facts like what you're saying. And very clearly there is a role for responsible, capable, well-spoken people to be outspoken about this kind of thing, to I don't want to use the phrase wake people up because it's like the worst phrase ever, but to get this stuff on people's radar and encourage people that there are tangible steps that they can take to protect themselves, to there's steps that they can take to not take steps that would get them in trouble if they weren't aware of what's going on. So I've been kind of figuring out how to edge myself back into this kind of conversation while keeping in mind that those sorts of ends or those sorts of means aren't the only means that you should be participating in. It's very good to be involved in your local community, involved with your local government, school board, talking to people about this kind of thing, getting this kind of thing on people's radar and encouraging people to take steps to change that. But there's also another part of life as well. And that's the part of the life that I feel like I've been being exposed to, kind of getting back into. And it's been at the same time as a whole bunch of other people. You've been, what was it, last Christmas that you were received in the church?
Yeah, Christmas Eve. Yeah.
What was it that took you from this world, the conspiracy, libertarian politics, that sort of world? How did this break into your radar? How did Orthodoxy get into that world for you?
H.G. Wells.
Go on. that was not what I expected.
Okay, so I don't know, it's up here somewhere. There's a trilogy that H.G. Wells wrote, and they're all nonfiction essays on politics and global politics. So as I started digging into the Great Reset, ESG, it inevitably led me to some older globalists, which I'd already had kind of a peripheral interest in. So I had read like Tragedy and Hope 101, but I'd never sat down and read, that, what was it, 1,500 page tragedy. I just can't do it. I've heard people do lectures on it, and I'm just like, golly, I don't want to read that. And so, yeah, H.G. Wells has these series of essays that were nonfiction, where he's writing from a globalist perspective, and he was very involved with government and especially in leading them into technological directions and giving them ideas for technologies and stuff like that. And he talks about in one of these essays how he wanted to see science become the world religion and draw people away from faithful religions. And in order by achieving this through science, then you could then incorporate a one world government. But the one world government was not going to be at all possible as long as there were such large religious and cultural differences. And and I started looking at that and thinking about it, and I was like, well, that really, like, I grew up in a religious, not, I wouldn't say religious household, but I grew up Southern Baptist. My parents weren't real active in church, but they would send me to church, if I wanted to go. There was a bus that the church sent around and they drove through my apartment. So my parents would put me on that bus and send me on my way and get their Sunday morning break from the kids because we went to church that morning. And I guess when I was in high school, I got pretty involved in the church, but I just found certain things lacking as I got older. Growing up, being Baptist and, or Baptist, non-denominational, but it was all Bible church. It was all basically the same stuff, right? And so I just found a lot lacking, and I didn't really see a point to it. It's like Father Stephen DeYoung says, it's like you just check a bunch of boxes in your head and then you're good to go. And it just didn't seem right. It just felt empty. Like I was just like, all right, I don't even know why I'm doing this. I don't even know if I believe in God. I just say I believe, and everybody believes that I believe. And I'm like, I don't even know what this. I don't even know what all this is that I'm doing. If I had questions, they usually weren't answered. It was usually like this long runaround, and I was just like, all right, I'm done with this. I'm 30. I'm in my 30s. I have 5 kids. I'm working. I don't have time to be dealing with this. It's not adding anything to me. And so after my second divorce, I was just, that's it. No more church, no more religion, no more nothing. I drove around for probably 6 months over the road, with in complete silence for 6 months. Didn't listen to a thing. Didn't listen to music, didn't listen to talk radio, didn't listen to nothing. Just constantly running through my head. Do I actually believe there's a God? Do I? And just like coming to these, looking at nature around me and coming to my own conclusions, or what I thought were my own conclusions. Come to find out, a lot of people believe the things that I came to on my own, which is really strange if you really sit and think about it. So it is. So I whenever I read this essay, it clicked. I was like, that sounds familiar. And I messaged Pete. I texted Pete, and this was right around the same time that COVID was kicking off. And I said, Pete, I said, I'm agnostic. And he goes, yeah. So why the hell do I look around and see Revelation? And he goes, a lot of people are saying that. And that's what started moving me.
Interesting.
And then hearing Cyprian now on Pete's show saying the same things I was thinking, I was like, all right, so I'm not a lunatic. I'm not crazy. Like this is something that's out there. This is something that people are looking at. And so I just started going down the rabbit hole and just started looking and searching and listening to people and weeding out people I thought were insane versus people that I thought were saying things that made sense. And, here I am now. Was it 2-3 years later?
So then in what way has your conversion to Orthodoxy changed the way that you look at your research, or has it?
No, because I'm trying to see, I want to see what they're saying, like what the elites are saying, what people that advocate for these things are saying. I guess I do listen to people that come that I would consider, at least on my side on this particular issue, with a little more discernment and not full-hearted belief in what they're saying or how they think. I'm cautious about them because I recognize the perspective they're coming from. But at the same time, I think, just for the most part, I'm reading what the elites are writing and just trying to see what they're saying, right?
Because what you're doing there really is you're reading, what is it? You're reading yesterday's history today. So, or you're reading tomorrow's history today. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah, you're reading tomorrow's history today. There was a phrase that, or a tweet that absolutely rocked my world. I got a couple super chats here we'll go through in just a sec. There's a tweet that absolutely rocked my world a couple of years ago. Naval Ravikant was the one who put it on my radar. That was when I was going through my kind of Eastern mysticism, dabbling in sort of Buddhism, psychedelics, that kind of thing. Okay. And there's this guy named Amused Chimp, and he was a fantastic tweeter. He just stopped tweeting and has never tweeted again. But he said, if the news is fake, imagine history. It was just one short phrase. And I was already kind of like a conspiracy. I'm not like married to any of my ideas, really, my like views of the world. To me, it's like a source of energy and excitement when something that I believe gets disproven. I'm more than happy to believe that I've been believing something wrong.
Right.
So conspiracies have always been just entertaining to me, and I don't really hold on to anything too tightly. But I don't remember where I was going with that. I was talking about conspiracies.
Tomorrow's history today.
Oh yeah. So with history, when I realized I'm watching what's happening with COVID, and I'm like, this is just transparent what's going on. It's so clear coming from studying the Kennedy assassination and the lives of the Dulles brothers leading up to how they set up the CIA and everything the CIA has done. Like, it's like once you've read enough of this stuff, you just kind of recognize that everything being put in front of you is all a play. Like it's a movie that's being put together for you across. The movie doesn't stop between mediums. It's one continuous movie from the screen showing a film to the screen showing a media production to the screen showing you your social media feed. All of it is a movie that's being played for you. And so to me, it was just such a natural transition right over to this, recognizing the spiritual world. So it was interesting how it was a very secular kind of observation, but it connected the dots for me spiritually, that this is what I'm watching here is a spiritual play, a spiritual performance that's being put on to capture my mind. And I could see where it was capturing my mind and how it was capturing my mind. And I guess I kind of realized that there's wiring in my head that is built to latch onto a narrative like that. Your mind, like human beings, think in stories. Right. So because we think in stories, then the way your mind gets controlled is by a story, and your mind is always going to be controlled by a story. There has to be a story that controls your mind because that's what your mind is. So then I was like, well, what's the ultimate story? Where's the truest story that I can find? So we were talking before the show, and we realized that there was kind of two different, we were almost inverted on a thing here, where I very much read my way into the church from the philosophy perspective. So it's always been the academic part of it has always come very naturally to me. And it's been the more experiential part of it that is something I have to do consciously. It doesn't come naturally. And it seemed to me like what you said, you're almost the other way around.
Right.
That it's been the experiential part of it that has just clicked with you. Talk a little bit about how that is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll explain it like I explained it to you at the beginning. So, like my life was, I had a pretty rough life growing up. We were really poor. My mom and dad got divorced when I was really young. Then they got back together when I was like 6 or so. And we were extremely poor. We were living in government housing in Dallas, close to Oak Cliff, which, if you know anything about Dallas, that's a really rough part of town. And then my mom would go days without eating. And even though my mom and dad were together, my dad was working so much. He was working basically 3 full-time jobs. He was working construction plus retail. And I think he was doing like 2 construction jobs at a time. Plus he was working retail doing lumber. And so he wasn't home very often. We didn't see him very much. And my mom would go days without eating to make sure my brother, myself, and my dad all ate. And there were years we just lived on like peanut butter and jelly and oatmeal. That was it. Like, we didn't eat anything else. I remember one Thanksgiving, one of my dad's managers gave us a duck because we couldn't afford to get a turkey. And he was a duck hunter. So he gave us a duck for Thanksgiving. And that was like the greatest thing I'd ever eaten in my life at that point in time. And so growing up, it was pretty rough. Then I moved out when I was like 17, got my own apartment, struggled through that, joined the military, got booted out of that due to a bunch of partying and going through a divorce and not emotionally stable while I was there. And it was just, that was a big mess. That was a really dark point in my life. And then, I guess after that, I couldn't find a job for like 10 months, fell way behind on child support, was couch surfing, didn't really have a place to stay, was trying to stay near Houston at that point in time so I could be close to my kids and see them. Then when I did start working, I was really poor. I had to choose at times between eating, going to work, and going to see my kids. You know, if I could afford the gas to go to work and go see my kids, then a lot of times I couldn't feed myself and my kids. You know, so there was my first ex-wife basically refused to let me see my kids for years. She just wasn't into, she wanted me gone. I remember when my daughter was like 11 years old, she was playing with the calluses on my hands. She goes, "Daddy, what's that on your hands?" And I said, "Oh, those are my work gloves." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And then she goes, "Mama just wishes you would go away so we could be a normal family." So I was dealing with stuff like that. A lot of the physical world that I encountered was really a struggle for me. It was really hard to pull myself up and get to a place of comfort. And so, but I just kept working and working and working and working and working and working, and lingering in the back of my mind constantly was this instability, this spiritual, emotional instability. It wasn't really depression. It was something else. It was almost like I felt like multiple people pulling at my brain, at my mind at all times. I was going in so many different directions. And so once I got to a position here with my third marriage with Beatrix, we bought this house, we bought this property. My job is stable. I don't make a whole lot of money, but I make enough. We make enough money. We're comfortable. Coming from a time where you're really, really poor, you don't really ask for a whole lot. So, it's kind of like, all right, like whatever, I'm good. I'm stable. Everything's straight. I got a little money in my account. I'm not going to starve. Like, we're cool. Like, it's all good. And I got to this place where I'm doing this podcast and I'm talking about politics. I'm talking about life. I'm talking about how to put yourself in a position to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that it's not all about the material world. I've never been a big materialist. I couldn't afford to be. So it was just out of necessity. I lived minimally for so long that it's just a habit. That's just the way I live. I don't ask for a lot. And so I got to this place where I'm still struggling mentally, spiritually, emotionally with all these demons, I guess you could call them, in my head due to experiences growing up, through my childhood, having a rough life, having a rough childhood. And I never could place how to get that in order. I could never figure out how to get it in order. And it was the church really spoke to me. And it spoke to me. I like when a lot of people, like one of my buddies I go to church with, we started going, well, we joined the church at the same time. I had gone on and off prior to him starting to come to church, but we joined the church on the same day. And he came from a Reformed background. He's experienced every denomination of Christianity. Orthodoxy, he said this was it. This is the last one. What else is there? And he would spend the entire liturgy with his nose in the book, following along. And I didn't. I'm staring at the icons, smelling the incense. And you remember when Buck talks about reading God's revelation to the human heart? He was talking to Father Turbo about that. And he said, I got this feeling like right here in my stomach, right in the pit of my stomach. I got that every time I went to liturgy. Every single time. It was there. I don't know what it was. I didn't read along. I didn't know what was going on. I was just standing there, just letting it happen. And that, I went away from the church for a few months. And I was still kind of listening to podcasts that talked about it. I was still reading a few books, but I was like, man, I don't know, because there's still that part of me, that rebellious kind of like wild side of me that still lives deep within my soul. And I'm like, man, yeah, I'm not sure this is for me. And I kept telling my wife, I'm going to go back. And she'd ask me every once in a while, are you going to go to church today? And I'd be like, nah, I don't think so. And I went through that for a few months. And then one day I was just like, Saturday, we were laying down to go to bed. I said, all right, I'm going to go to church tomorrow. She was like, you are? I was like, yeah. She was like, all right. And I started going back and I never stopped. And I've just been going ever since. And so the battle for me has never been the physical world. It's like, I've done that. Like, I see what some of my friends who are catechumens are going through, and it pains me, because I'm like, I'd rather that happen to me. I know how to deal with it. I've already dealt with that. Like, you can't throw. So with me, it was like, you couldn't throw something like that at me and expect it to deter me. That's not what was going to deter me. It was all up here. It was all right here. It had to make me, I had to be uncomfortable. I needed, like I said, those subtle whisperings to make me too uncomfortable to take action. And that's what happened. And once I got over that, it was just, it's constantly a struggle for me. Constantly. I'm constantly like reading about the saints and their spiritual life and how they built their spiritual life, their prayer life, how they did that. Like, that's what I need. I don't need the theology. I don't need the dogma. That's not what moved me. What moved me was that internal dialogue, monologue, being not completely put to rest. Like I said, I still struggle with it. I still fight with it. But I know what it is now. I recognize it now. I know how to stop it. I know what methods to take and what I need to do whenever these things start going on. And I didn't have a clue before. I would say there were periods, maybe not my complete life, but there were periods where I was unstable, just emotionally and mentally unstable. And I would do wild things that probably should have gotten me killed at times, because I was so just looking to shut that off. And how do I shut it off? And I found the key.
Wow. That was That was a hell of a clip right there, man. I don't know a way to not awkwardly segue this. So I'm just going to awkwardly segue it. There's a couple of super chats here, and I think this will kind of tie in an interesting way. From random username 928405531. I'm going to get that memorized one of these days here. $5. He did two $5 super chats back to back. Thank you very much, man. He said, thoughts on an evolving parallel track for humanity. With genetic engineering becoming normalized like trans ideology, humans will become less and less human. At what point is theosis not possible because the person is no longer human? Now, making it clear that neither of us is qualified to authoritatively speak on when theosis is not possible because someone's no longer human. I do think that it's an interesting the fact that we don't know the answer to that is a reason why that should indicate the danger of that is inherent here. Essentially, what he's talking about, this is I know who this is, a friend of mine, and he said that he and I have had this conversation in the past, that essentially what you're almost getting through transhumanism, their explicit goal is to create a new species. It's no longer Homo sapiens sapiens. It's something completely different altogether at the genetic level. So if we've been created, our genes are obviously, this is the other super chat down here, $5 Australian from Jason at 2-Bit Podcast. He said the soul is not genetic. And I do agree that the soul is not genetic. However, as they went back and forth on here, Christ took on a human body. So he is a human. He does have human genes. And when you begin messing around with genes, like this is full. The word antichrist that Ven Armani, he made a really interesting allusion or an analogy about this the other day, that he said, I guess it's not an analogy. He explained it in an interesting way, that antichrist doesn't mean in opposition to Christ. It means replacement rather than Christ. Yeah. And that's what, when you're starting to change things on the genetic level and you're starting to genetically like jigger up what is in a human being, who knows what the result of it would be. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I got a couple of things. So I would say, first of all, there's not a man on earth that can put limitations on God and understand God's mind. And so through repentance, that's all you can do if you get to that point, right? I mean, that's it. I asked Father Joseph Honeycutt when he was visiting this past Saturday. I said, this is what led to that statement he had made that was just so mind-blowing. But I asked him, I said, because he's talking about how people act in a way to control their own will. They're putting themselves in the shoes of God. They're acting as if they're their own gods. And it struck me after there was an audio book that my dad had sent me on Theosis. It was short. It was probably like an hour and a half long, and it was really interesting. It was a really interesting audio book. If you haven't listened to it all, I think I put it up in the global chat, but group chat. But if not, I'll send it to you. He talks about man is created for theosis, in pursuit of theosis. Right. Mm-hmm. And so if man is created to pursue theosis, wouldn't then acting as your own God be shortcutting and inverting, or rather than theosis? Right. Mm-hmm. So that is an instance of pride. So if you enter into this transhumanist agenda and you co-opt your body and you change your body in order to be your own God and create your own man, then I think that you have a lot of repenting to do because you are putting yourself in the position of God. If you are born into a system like this, just like we're all born into modern time and into specific systems, we don't have a guidebook necessarily coming out of the womb that explains to us why the microchip the doctor put in our head when we were a day old is an eternal sin that cannot be forgiven. And I don't expect there to ever be a guidebook to say anything of the sort. So if you're born into that type of world and you're going through that type of world, as Joseph, as Father Joseph said the other day, David wasn't saved because he was a pure human being. David was saved because he spent his entire life chasing Theosis, chasing the will of God, doing everything in his power, right? Noah was not a righteous man. He was the most righteous of his time. If you read about his time, that's a very low bar, you know? And so we are people of our time. And God knows what our time is and what we're dealing with. And so the pursuit of theosis, the pursuit of God, and the true repentance of the heart is what he's looking for. And that's the best I can tell you on that. That's like the best answer I can steal from as many priests as possible.
That was fantastic. That was a very good answer. I'm hoping that I'm going to see you this next weekend, this upcoming weekend here in Houston.
I'll be cussing that entire drive. I hate that city.
That's right. Oh yeah, you're gonna have to be there.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like I got to drive through downtown, get to Sam Houston Tollway, and go over to Hammerley. Like I got to drive through the city.
You're gonna have to bathe when you get home so you can get the stink off.
Yeah, I'm hoping they'll have the baptismal full so I can bathe when I get there.
Hopefully random username here. I know he's in the Houston area, so I'm hoping he's going to come out for that. That would be pretty cool. You could meet him there.
Yeah, cool.
Is there anything else? Any other stuff related to ESG or Orthodoxy related to that you've been thinking about lately, or that anything that's on your mind? Any last message?
Man. Yeah. All right. So Father Joseph told a story the other day, and I sent this to Buck and Adam earlier today because it was on my mind, and it's something that I really had to kind of look at and kind of think about. And so there's a gay guy. I visited an Orthodox church. After a few visits, he asked the priest for a few moments to speak in private. So the priest took him to his office and asked, "What can I do for you today?" The gay guy said, "Father, I want to join your church." And the priest said, well, you need to begin to learn about Jesus's love and the role of the church in the world. And the gay guy said, "Father, I'm gay." And the priest said, "You need to learn about Jesus's love and the role of the church in the world." And the gay guy said, "Father, I said I'm gay." And the priest said, "Yes, you need to learn about Jesus's love and the role of the church in the world." And the gay guy said, "Father, I don't think you understand. I'm gay." And the priest said, "I know. You need to learn about Jesus's love and the role of the church in the world." So the man began to cry. He'd visited every denomination of church. Some told him being gay didn't matter. Others told him he was condemned to hell. But the Orthodox priest only offered the cure. He joined the church after 2 years of faithfulness, and 10 years later, he was abstinent. So one of the hardest things that I've had to come to terms with when entering the church was it doesn't matter how many books you read and how much knowledge you have on the theology or the dogma. And this isn't a shot at you. This is just something I've had to learn here lately. The cure is the same, and it's systematic. And it's through the sacraments and through the church that you find it. And I'm reading a book right now, actually, that I would suggest anybody read. It's a dialogue between a monk that visits a church and gives gives a talk, and gives a sermon, and a priest and some congregants. It's called The Illness and Cure of the Soul in the Orthodox Tradition. So I've gotten so much just out of the 40 pages of this book. I was taking notes on the preface. It was so good. Huh. Yeah, there's this line in the preface, man. Let me read this to you, because it was like one of those things. My eyes just went, oh, let me see. Where was it? Oh, let me just read that out of the notes because I wrote it down. This is in the preface. Man cannot be limited to living a social, ethical, and religious life. He must be transformed. That little line, it just boom. And this entire book is just full of that. Just this dialogue between these 5 people and this monk. Having this dialogue, and it's just, and all he's talking about is the church. Orthodoxy is not a religion. It is a therapeutic science.
Ooh. That was in that book, or that's something you're saying?
No, that's in the book. Yeah. And that's
wow.
That's how he begins framing orthodoxy when these people are asking him these questions. And he's just like,
therapeutic science.
It's a therapeutic science. And I've heard you say before that Father Josiah said to you that orthodoxy is a hospital for the soul. Mm-hmm. I know whenever I was going through my catechumen, that my priest shared with us, I'm sure that you've heard the same thing, though, that the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan was Jesus picking up the injured man, the unclean man covered in blood, bringing that man to the church, that the inn represents the church, that the innkeeper represents the priest.
Yes. Yes, and he drops him off, and he leaves the money to pay for his...
Anything you need, I'll take care of it.
Yep. Yeah. Amy, the book was called The Illness and Cure of the Soul in the Orthodox Tradition.
I'll shoot it over to you.
Yeah. It's Father...
It's
Hierotheos.
Metropolitan Hierotheos.
Wow.
Yeah.
Serpico said, my favorite such example was seeing a man saturated with tats from his neck to his knuckles. He was a monk in what is considered one of the most holiest places on earth. Clearly Mass media is wrong. There's another story that when you started telling that one, it reminded me of one that Adam Patrick has told me before. There was a monk at a monastery, and he had 12 drinks a day, 12 of alcohol. He was an alcoholic. He had 12 drinks a day, and so he died, and they're having the service after he died, and some of the other monks are like, why are we treating this like it was such a huge loss? He was a drunkard, and they told him that when he first got to the monastery, he was drinking 24 drinks a day, and his first year there, he dropped to 23. His next year there, he dropped to 22. And he'd been there for 12 years and had dropped himself down to 12. And that reframing of it, I probably didn't tell the story exactly right, but it's that general idea that...
I'll tell it. I know which one you're talking about. I actually didn't hear it from Adam. I heard it from Father Stephen DeYoung on Lord of Spirits. You're just not paying attention, young man.
Oh, I guess I'm not. Yeah.
There was the monk. He was a drunk, and he joined the monastery, and the abbot put him as the greeter at the gate. And so the first person that the tourists would see when they came to visit the monastery was this drunk monk. And all the other monks were confused by this. And the entire time he was there for 15 years, he was the greeter at the gate. And they would complain to the abbot, and the abbot would just say, yeah, I know. And one day he fell dead at the gate, and another monk stumbled upon him, and he goes running to the abbot. He's like, Abbot, the drunk monk, he's dead. And the abbot said, yes, I know. He goes, what do you mean you know? He said, well, around sunrise, I saw angels descend from heaven and take his soul up with them to heaven. And the monk said, I don't understand. And he said, what you don't know is 15 years ago when he got here, he was drinking 20 drinks a day, and he was drunk every day, all day. And every year on Pascha, he gave up 1 drink a day. And when he died yesterday, or this morning, he was drinking 4 drinks a day, and he was drunk all day, every day. You don't know a man's struggle. It's not your position to judge him.
We'll end it on that one. Where do you want people to find you for your work? You have a Substack. I've got them running on the bottom here, but for the audio version,
yeah,
people get more Tommy Salmons.
Yeah, I just started putting the videos up at YouTube. So if you want to go look for me at YouTube, Rumble, I put them up at Rumble as well. I put all my videos are up at my Substack. And if you don't want to remember whatever the Substack domain is, it's just TommySalmons.com. It brings you right to my Substack. Thanks to my buddy Steven Johnson, who's a faithful listener of my podcast. And then libertarianinstitute.org /year-0/ is where you can get audio, and that will download from my Libsyn feed, or you can go anywhere. Apple
year zero podcast. Yeah.
Year zero. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it. This has been a very good talk. You've given me a lot to chew on. This is the second really good talk I've had with a friend today that's given me a lot to chew on. It's definitely Lent, and I was going to ask you, how's Lent been for you so far?
I was doing great until Sunday.
Until you started talking to me.
No. Sunday, for some reason, I woke up Sunday, man. Like I went to 2 services last week. I went to pre-sanctified liturgy last Wednesday. I was doing really good. I was in good spirits. It wasn't really bothering me. My wife spends hours cooking, and she's so supportive. Like I couldn't ask for a better woman in my life. So I'm very lucky there. And so Sunday I woke up, man, and I was like, I don't want to move. I just don't want to do it. And I'm sitting there, and I get out of bed, and I didn't want to get out of bed. And then I was like, I want my coffee. And I was like, no, I can't have my coffee because the Eucharist is today. And I was like, yeah, but I could just stay home and I could do work around the yard. And I struggled, man. I struggled, and I drugged myself out, and I went to church, and I had a really, really great liturgy and good fellowship with the people afterwards during coffee hours. So, it was worth it. But yeah, man, the struggle's real, and it continues every day. And I'm glad I got there that day too, because the sermon, the little homily that Father Michael spoke on was exactly what I was dealing with that morning. So it was exactly what I needed. So, it's all good.
It's funny how that works out, huh?
It is, isn't it?
All right. Well, thank you, man. You guys can, like I said at the beginning of the show, you can support the show and join the King Pill Discord, subscribestar.com/kingpilled. We'd love to have you in there. A few of the people who have been commenting here in the live stream today are from that Discord. So, and then you can follow me on Twitter at @RealKingPilled. Appreciate you guys. There's going to be, Tommy mentioned a company earlier today, or earlier in the conversation, that is going to be a sponsor for this show now. So in future episodes, you're going to see an ad for a fantastic coffee company. They are absolutely phenomenal. So that's just a free one in there for Fox and Sons. Shout out Stephen Fox.
Yeah, before he starts advertising for Fox and Sons, go to foxandsons.com, promo code 0 to get 18% off, $25 or more of coffee. Now I can be King Pilled or whatever he wants to
There
do
you
out
go.
there.
There you go. I'll tell you guys what my code is. I'll give Tommy the free one here, and I'll tell you guys the code you can use for the show here on the next episode. We've got a couple interesting ones coming up here. I've nailed down a few people. Just got to pick an exact time. Father Deacon Dr. Ananias is going to come on to discuss more about Aristotle and the Trinity and stuff related to that. And then there'll be some other interesting ones in the future as well. So thank you guys for listening.
Random guy that asked about Theosis, that's who you need to ask. Don't ask me. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I'm definitely going to bring it up to him then too, because we've had that conversation before. Anyways, thank you guys for listening. Do us a favor, share the show, like it, do all that YouTube stuff.